Well, welcome back. I hope you're well. Today I want to talk about the emotion that drives you. That's the question for today. And in many ways, that question is still at its core connected to the various conversations that we have had over the past 2 weeks. In which I started perhaps what I thought was a useful way of reverse engineering the process of success with regards to relationships. And the question 2 weeks ago was whether you were prepared for success in your relationships, man or woman, irrespective of your sex. And the weeks that have gone by, I have posed questions to you, and finally I have started to provide some ideas that perhaps could be considered. Now, in today's session, I want to talk about the emotion that drives you. I am going to target this towards women. The idea applies to men as well. The question about what emotion drives you at its core speaks to the question about what spirit animates you, what spirit motivates you, what spirit inspires you, what spirit educates you, and therefore what spirit controls you. Now, if you took away the word spirit from the entire of what I've just talked about, and if you replaced it with emotion, what emotion motivates you? What emotion inspires you? What emotion controls you? What emotion drives you? It becomes very easy to understand how success can be achieved, because think about yourself as an engineer trying to solve a problem, and we know that 2 + 2 = 4. But think about this secondary equation. 2 + x = 5. Now solve for x. Now, for those of you who perhaps can remember some of the early things we learned in algebra and simultaneous equations, you're now solving for x. And you can solve for x by the process of what we call elimination. You transfer from one side to the other side, you subtract 2 from 5, and then you get the answer 3. That's the same process we apply to relationships. Now, as a human being, and I'm going to speak to women going forward, if you can, it's important to identify the emotion that drives you. Now, it might be as easy as 2 + 2 = 4. On the other hand, it could be you need to apply the process of inversion, where you simply say, I do not know what emotion drives me, but let's call that emotion X. I know my outcomes, I know my desires, but there is a discrepancy between my outcomes and my heart's desires, so I can solve for X. Now, the reason this is important is because if you can identify the emotion, you can solve the problem. If you're willing to attempt to solve the problem, you can find success. It's really that simple. Think about your life as an idea. There are ideas that you have been given explicitly, but also ideas you have come about, either by osmosis, or whether by absorption, or perhaps by choice. Those ideas that you have picked up all over the years are driving you, they're animating you. Sometimes you may not know why you make certain decisions. Now, I have met people, and I know myself to have been one of those people who, at the point where you're making a decision or taking an action, your conscience, a part of you is telling you or reminding you that the action you're taking, the decision you're making, is not congruent with the outcome you want. But you cannot help yourself, partly because some of the actions have come from ideas that are within your subconscious and emotions that are therefore animating those ideas and animating your decisions. Now let me move fast, quickly, by presenting you with one idea. And think about this. When I use the word daddy or father, what emotion comes to your mind with regards to yourself? What picture comes to mind? You see, when we think in pictures. Now, we also think in written texts, but primarily we think in pictures first. If I say father, for various people, a picture comes to mind. That picture sometimes is a picture of calmness or pain. Now, no two people have the same concept of father or daddy, because for some people, that name or that word reminds them of someone who was never there. For some other people, it reminds them of someone who was always kind, loving, and for some people, it's an image of someone who was cruel, vindictive, harsh, perhaps someone who even committed incest. So we all have a different concept of father. Therefore, whatever concept we have of father or daddy is the avatar about men that we have. So women, generally speaking, it's important you understand this. Sometimes the idea you have or the emotion you have towards men are not based on the men you meet. They are based on the ideas planted previously in your subconscious mind, based on your lived experience, based on errors of commission, errors of omission, or errors which we could categorize as sins of the fathers. Sins of the fathers that will live up until the third and the fourth generation, except you make a change. We think in pictures. So you might be in a relationship as a young woman and you have a loved one, someone's face that you can recall if I mention their name. But what you have is a conflict between the person you love and the idea, which you might say wears the avatar of daddy or man, and recognize that it's not always just father. It's whatever avatar, whatever frame that you might say masculine energy comes in. It could be a father, it could be an uncle, it could be a loved one, it could be a boyfriend, it could be an ex, husband, partner, whatever. And the experience you may have had may have animated you, therefore controlling you. Rather than motivate you or inspire you, it actually repels you. And whilst you might think that you've overcome those past traumas, if you haven't gone through the process of healing, transformation, then what you're doing is carrying dead weight, like a dead skin. And it just hinders you from actually developing acceleration, something that I will talk about shortly. Now, this brings me to a concept. The concept is simple. In order to have success, success has to start with an idea. Currently, there is an ideal that controls your life. Now, whether you know this or not, an ideal is simply two words. Idea plus love. The love is abbreviated. IDEA, which is idea, and L, which is love. An ideal is something, an idea you are in love with, something you're resonating with, and something you've become one with. The two become one. So if the past idea you have about relationships, men, masculinity, is a negative idea, then it means that your ideal, whilst you might say differently, your true ideal in your subconscious mind doesn't speak well. And therefore, there's this aversion you have towards men. To make a change, the first thing you have to do is choose a new idea. Begin with the end in mind, whatever that picture might be. Success, happiness, joy. And choose that idea. Fall in love with that idea. Merge yourself with the idea so that when you think of father or daddy or men, there's something positive. Let me leave you with this, with regards to this last, the comment I made earlier. Whatever animates you puts you into what we call a positive motion state, which means you develop acceleration. The speed at which you travel either moves you towards a life where you need to be interdependent, or it pushes you away and therefore pushes you towards being independent. That independence can come from several ways. It could be negatively motivated, or it can be positively motivated. Now stay with me, let me perhaps see if I can illustrate two concepts. Good and evil, the yin and the yang, positive and negative. Now on the negative side, what you find is, what drives you is definitely ignorance. Ignorance, in my opinion, is perhaps the major reason why people fall short of their goals and their dreams and their visions, and therefore do not lead the life they want. Ignorance. The problem we have in the world is primarily a wisdom problem. On one side, on the negative side, you have ignorance. Now, ignorance creates worry and doubt in every one of us. Worry and doubt are emotional states. Remember that ignorance has come, and the worry and the doubt has come both from your lived experience, from what you've gleaned from observations, seeing, hearing, experiencing. And so all of that is not necessarily to ridicule your experiences. I'm talking about effects, outcomes. I'm not worried about cause. Yes, you may have every right to be upset. You may have had a deadbeat father. You may have had an appalling role model in a man or in men. But the question is, what outcome do you want? What is that North Star that you were shooting for, and therefore the outcomes you want? Ignorance creates worry and doubt. Worry and doubt has a way of manifesting itself through what we call fear. So most people, with regards to relationships, are operating from ignorance, worry, doubt, and fear. Now, fear has to be, and this is a fascinating thing, if you think about the human body, there are three parts to who we are: spiritual, physical, and intellectual or mental. If you have fear in your body, that fear has to do one of two things. It must be manifested as an effect, as anxiety in yourself, which is why you find most people, most women, most men, they meet someone nice and lovely, and after a few months, because they have in their subconscious mind ignorance, worry, doubt, and fear, they become anxious of the relationship because fear must be manifested in the form of anxiety. Anxiety, unfortunately, because we have a physical body, anxiety, we do one thing with anxiety. We either try to treat it or we try to suppress it. Most people do not consider getting professional help as empowering. So we've created a society whereby most people are conditioned not to seek for help. Now, we know how to seek for help when we have a physical injury. We do not know how to seek for help when we have a mental or intellectual issue. Therefore, most people do one thing. We suppress our anxiety. The more we suppress anxiety into the body, the more we find that we have what we call relational depression. This relational depression leads to a position where, in addition to our bodies, as a result of the suppression, we find actually we start to disintegrate. We're never able to find something good, like a good person, stay with them, and make something positive. We are always finding that it leads to destruction and death of that union or that relationship. This creates a series of issues where you find people go through, what I call predictable cycles. You meet someone, you date for 6 months, it's over. You meet someone, you date for 1 year, you can time it with the clock, it comes to an end because people are conditioned by ignorance. Now, we know from the way the universe works that wherever there is a positive, there is always a negative. We call that a law, the law of polarity, that there can't be a negative without a positive. The yin and the yang, the law of gender. What this simply means is that in order for you to achieve success in your relationships, you have to move to what we call a higher level of energy. Now, we understand energy very easily from science, that you cannot move from a low level of energy to a high level of energy. It cannot work. Energy has to move from a higher form to a lower form. The higher form of energy and the opposite of ignorance is knowledge. Quite simple. Which is why in the sessions that I have talked about, I have always emphasized the importance of study, learning, the passion for learning. Even the biblical, the Jewish books, the Christian books, even in the Muslim tradition, the Quran, it talks about a simple concept. It says learn to do well. It doesn't say pray. It doesn't say think. It doesn't say fast. It says learn. Learning comes from study. Knowledge is a product of the pursuit of information. As you study knowledge, what you get is an awareness. It's almost like a light bulb moment, an awareness of the difference between positive and negative, good and bad, or good and evil. The pursuit of that awareness further create understanding, which is why the great books and the great writers say, wisdom is the principal thing, but in all you're getting, get understanding. Because once you have understanding, in many ways you can see clearly. You can know when you are perhaps in the wrong place and when you are in the right place. Now here is where it gets interesting. If you continue to study and continue to increase your understanding through awareness, what that creates is faith. On the negative side is fear. Ignorance creates worry and doubt, which leads to fear. Study leads to understanding, which leads you to a position of faith. Interestingly, faith comes by what you hear, but also faith leaves by what you hear. Now, for many of you, you may relate to this analogy or example. You meet someone, he's a great guy. He ticks all the boxes you want. At the early stage, he professes his love for you. He tells you what he thinks of the relationship. He paints a picture of his vision. You fall for him. Sometimes you even unite with that possibility of that vision. This occurs within the first month or two of your interaction, sometimes beyond. It gets to a point where you unite with him spiritually and even emotionally and even mentally. Now, this is despite you having maybe a track record of a bad image of men, but you've met someone who has shown you the light. You start to connect deeply with the person. And then you find actually your worry, which is the subconscious state, bubbles to the surface. And as soon as this happens, you run to the nearest person who can reconfirm and reaffirm your concern and your doubts. I call this the third voice. That third voice helps you and facilitates a process of analyzing all the things that are wrong or potentially could be wrong. And let me make you one promise. Whatever you focus on expands. Whatever you focus on, you feel. Whatever your emotions focus on, motion comes out of that process. So what you find is that you develop a level of motion on the negative side. That causes you to what we call the rubber band effect. You snap back to your conditioned experience. Why? Because you entertained a third voice. You entertained a voice of worry that reminded you of the doubt, that caused the fear, that started to make you anxious, and started to cause what I call a separation, a disease in the relationship where you were creating for yourself something that never existed. Because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, and as a woman thinks in her heart, so is she. In other words, rather than allow faith to manifest itself through the body, you allowed yourself to go back to fear. Now, had you stayed in the positive, what you find is that faith has to be, rather than being suppressed, it's expressed in a form that shows that you are at ease, you're relaxed, you're creating, you're in a blissful state. But more importantly, rather than being depressed, you have a level of acceleration because you're picking up speed. You're moving in the right direction, picking up speed. Now women and men who are able to very quickly identify where they are in the spiritual state of consciousness and in the mental state of consciousness are able to manifest whatever they want on the physical plane of consciousness. If you find that you can hold on to the faith, which comes by hearing and hearing. Now, in other words, our minds, especially if we have had traumatic experiences, in our memory, you see, with our imagination, we can pre-play a future that does not exist. We can pre-play the future. But with our memory, we can only replay the past. If your past memory is negative, a father that molested you, a boyfriend that actually assaulted you, an experience with other men that is negative, perhaps just pain from masculine relationships, what you find, all of that in your memory stays. And it's not unusual, if you do not condition the use of your imagination, you will reach back into your memory and pull up pictures and start to play those pictures on the screen of your imagination. The more you play those pictures, the more you're conditioned to fear rather than faith, and therefore without any necessity for it, and almost with a guarantee, you will self-sabotage the relationship. Why? Because you had not controlled and trained yourself on how to use your memory and how to use your imagination. So, for those of you perhaps who have that difficulty, here is perhaps a simple exercise. You do not listen to your mind and you do not listen to the voice within you. You talk to yourself. Now, I'm not talking about affirmations. I'm not talking about incantations. I'm talking about talking to yourself specifically with regards to the outcome you want and the person who is the embodied manifestation of that outcome. Now, this simply means that rather than listen to the still voice within you that is telling you to run to safety, especially when there is no cause or reason for that, you speak life into what could be an opportunity you have in front of you. Now, faith without works is dead. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. You have to trust. You simply have to trust. Now, I'll talk about good faith and peaceable interactions very soon, but you have to trust. If you cannot trust, it will always be a failure. See, many women and many men who have had relational issues, unfortunately, get to a place where they're not willing to take a risk because their lived experience and their memory is full of failures and what we call reinforced realities. But I'll tell you this, you see, if you're not willing to take a risk, you cannot grow. And if you're not willing to grow and refuse to grow, you cannot be your best person. If you cannot be your best self, you will almost certainly fall short of finding happiness. And if you do not find happiness or success, you will find that there will be something about you that lives in regret. The best way to avoid regret is to recognize that regret and risks are two sides of the same coin. You have to stand on the edge of the coin, look at the risks, but also recognize that there are opportunities in the risk. On one side is regret. The path to regret is wide. It's always possible to say, well, I knew he was no good, or I went with my gut instinct. On the opposite side, the polar opposite side is risks, uncertainty. In the Chinese language, and this is what makes the Chinese quite formidable and fascinating, but also makes the Asians, generally speaking, formidable and impressive. The word risk to them comes as a two, we call letters, sign, symbol. Danger and opportunity. They don't see risks, they simply see opportunity. So therefore they take opportunities, believing, hopefully, that they will find success. You simply have to apply the same principles when it comes to relationships. But here is the key thing. Risks are simply words we use to define things or futures or potential outcomes for which we are ignorant about. So for example, if I came up to you and I said, I have two companies. The first company is company A and the second company is company B. And here are the risks with each company, and I say to you, we need to invest in one or both. But here are the risks. Risks are simply uncertainties we have based on our ignorance. On the other hand, if I brought those opportunities to you and you took those opportunities to someone who was perhaps considered the oracle of that particular investment world, say Warren Buffett, for example, and he sat down with you and he said, well, company A, what you have identified as risks, these are the reasons, and your fears and concerns are not unfounded, but you've overlooked a few things. This company has been trading for a number of years. This is what the financial statements say. It has X amount on the balance sheet. It has this amount of profitability, both in gross and operating and net margins, and therefore the free cash flow of the business is secure. He replaces your ignorance of the company with his knowledge of the company. Suddenly what you find is the law of displacement takes place. You've displaced a bad idea with a new idea. Therefore, faith is restored rather than fear. So you don't have to make the decision in trepidation. You can make the decision in certainty. So let me bring this to its full close. It's not enough just to have faith. You have to take action on the faith that you have, which simply means you continue to study, you continue to increase your understanding. And one of the best ways to actually increase your understanding and study of the opposite sex is, in my opinion, perhaps something that is not taught, but should be. You do so with what I call questions. You should always ask questions relentlessly in relationships. Don't leave it to chance. Don't think about what he, she, they may be thinking about. Communication is an important thing. You just ask questions. Ask questions, and when people answer, come in good faith. Come peaceably. Don't second guess what people think. When people tell you who they are, believe them. When people tell you how they want to be loved and how they love, accept it. Stop trying to change people. By study, you will increase, and by gathering more data, more information, you will increase your level of awareness. If you continue to study, you will gain more understanding. Understanding will create more faith and displace your fears. That faith will cause you to manifest in your well-being as a girl, as a man, such that people will see you and say, you look great, you look light, you look relaxed. The reason is simply you are at ease. You do not have relational disease. There's a peace that comes with you. Now that will cause you to move into acceleration, which is why on one side you can meet someone who has been dating same person for 10, 15 years and still does not know what decision they will make with regards to consolidating the union. And on the other hand, you could meet a lady who has met someone, and after 6 months, she says, we're ready to get married. We're ready to move to the next phase of life. Why? Because she is at ease. She's come into the interaction in good faith. She has studied. She continues to seek for further information from the right sources. She's put aside all of the ideas that cause her to self-sabotage and put aside all the third voices that are not really voices of reason, but rather voices of, you might say, destruction. And she's focused simply on making sure that she continues to learn, relearn, and unlearn. And therefore, she can accelerate within 6 months and move into a state of pair bonding and union with a loved one in a short period of time compared to other people that need more time. Now, if you think about everything I've shared so far, at the core of what I've shared with you is the word choices. The fact that you have to choose. No one else can make the decision for you. Now, in the previous session, I said something that I think perhaps is an important statement to make. And I will try and flesh it out in the sessions that follow. The statement I made is as follows. Choices are things that we can make for ourselves. You see, at any day, we can pick up a blank piece of paper and say, this is a new day and this is the new life I want. You and I do not have to live the same life as we did the day before. Your past represents experiences that you have had, good, bad, and indifferent. But you have paid a price for the negative parts of your past. You do not have to pay twice and continue to pay. You can make a change. You can simply say, I will start anew tomorrow. I pay the price. And going forward, I will choose an idea that I fall in love with and I will pursue success. Now, the reason I've said that is simply because it's not unusual for people to be guilted into believing that they do not deserve or will never have happiness or success in relationships because of a sin or because of something they did in the past. You see, the past is like a spent check. You can't spend it again. The future is like a promissory note. It hasn't arrived yet. The present is the only cash you have. Do not waste the little cash you have on a past that you don't get to rewrite. It's written in stone, it's fixed. You've paid the price, it's time to move on. Now, how you go about moving on is entirely up to you. Now, in the session yesterday, I talked about 2 potential ideas. You can choose a modern or you can choose a traditional idea when it comes to relationships. Now, I offer no judgment. I just simply say, whatever you choose, whatever you sow, you would reap, in good measures, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You do not get what you sow. We never get what we sow. We either get much more or much less. Now, it's important to also understand, whatever choice you make, those choices will come with constraints. They will come with consequences. And they will come with costs. And most importantly, trade-offs. You simply have to accept that. Now, if you can take everything that I've shared today, review the information, and think about the information, and make a choice. Whatever choice you make is yours. The life is yours to lead. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's yours to lead. Now, in the next session, I am going to perhaps address the masculine side of what I have talked about over the past 3 sessions. I have focused on women. I will move to men, and I will address the same, you might say, functional equivalent for men, and give men perhaps a set of ideas that they can consider. Now, I hope today's session has been useful.